So I'm going to say hi to everyone. This is Integral Leadership in Action, ILIA, ILIA, support pods, and we love them. And Bet's idea, and she's not here today, but we have Andres Malave, who's here. And we're going to, so Andres, let's see if this will actually let me have a co-speaker, it will, yes. So here is all of us. It's going to show all of us, but that's okay. So Andres is going to talk on this. I'm going to say, Andres, if I say this wrong, you're going to correct me, but it's sort of rather life work that Andres has been really working on since Icon and ILIA sort of started collaborating. And I found out that Andres and Brandon actually were really helpful to Tom in recollecting energy along with ILIA to actually have the Icon conference. Yay to everybody. Andres and I have gotten to work together, and it's awesome. And we realized that Integral really hasn't, in our mind, directly spoken to diversity, equity, inclusion, no, multiculturalism, and especially in the Latino realm. And so, Andres, I'm just going to get myself off. I'm going to put this onto speaker. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and this project. And if you want to yell out a question to me or anybody else, just do so. Does that work?
Perfect. Okay. Hi, Brandon.
Andres.
Great. Okay, so
Hi.
I'll get started here. Let's see. So
Having trouble with technology here, Andres. Let me go back to the other because it's okay. Andres, speak. I'll be very quiet.
You want me to share my screen now, or should I just do my introduction first and then go to the screen?
You're there now. Good. You do your whole thing just the way you want to. Introduce yourself and then to your slides.
Okay, so let me share and then. Okay, so can you see my first slide? Cool. Okay. So before I get to the welcome all of you, and a special thanks to Karen and Kim, who've been very helpful in putting this together. So before I get into my topic, just a brief personal introduction. My name is Andres Malave. I was born in New York City of Puerto Rican immigrant parents. But I was raised in Los Angeles. One thing from as early as I can remember, I've always loved stories, And I remember going to school in Los Angeles and coming back home and telling my parents a little bit about what we did. And they'd say, oh, that's how the Americans do it. We don't do it that way. And so from a very young age, I knew that there are at least two ways of looking at life. After I graduated, I did my bachelor's. I had the choice of whether I was going to stay in the United States or leave. And I decided to leave for two reasons. One, I was very curious about every place else, but also because I knew that if I wanted to be a proud speaking Latino, that was basically going to be a second-class status. And I had the choice that many people have of becoming white. And I decided, well, I'll just leave. And so I'm coming back. I'll be coming back to this later as I go into my presentation. I earned my living as an intercultural consultant. So what that means, I explain to people here how people there think and communicate so they can do business together. And I listened to a podcast a while back, I think it was around 2009, where Ken Wilber was being interviewed. And he said, we've mapped over 100 cultures, and we've broken them down into 4 basic perspectives, which you all know are the quadrants. And that caught my attention because I'd always been looking for a more specific way to explain the eternal question I was getting from everybody. Why are these cultures so different? And my only answer was context. But with the integral tool, I had sort of like a laser instead of a stick to manage this complexity. And as all of you integralists know, if you start applying this, it becomes psychoactive. And so what started happening is I began to look at my personal history and what was the place that I left. And I began to see, well, what are the collective interiors and the exteriors, et cetera. And this is how this project started developing. So that's my short intro. Now, this is just a shout out to all of you, and anybody who's interested in getting a perspective on why everyone in the United States has a good reason to be upset today. I encourage you to have a look at Rob Smith's 50-year journey to polarization, and I'll put that in the chat so you can check it out later. Okay, so let's go to the presentation. My slides, I've only got about 11, and so just to let you know, after that, maybe we'll do a round table or something to get ideas. So, reconciling polarities, Latinx and majority culture in USA. Is it possible to be both a proud-speaking Spanish Latino and a proud American? So my ask for this pod is to help me brainstorm about potential partners who would be interested in getting this project off the ground, and to explore other areas to consider within the scope of addressing these polarities, because I've been talking to myself about this for years, and nothing better than having more brains together. Okay, so what I want to start with, I started doing research on this on the ground back in 2019, and I went to visit the Civil War Museum in the summer. And here are some images that you can see there. But what I was not expecting was what they provoked in me. And for me, I grew up, as I said, on the West Coast of the United States. And for me, the Civil War was about freeing the slaves, and it ended back in 1865, or so I thought. But when I left the museum, I had a feeling that this had not ended for this part of the country. And it was a shock to me to see the different stories. And because this wasn't the version that I heard in my history classes. There is more to the Civil War than what I had learned. A month later, I went to the American Revolution Museum in Yorktown, Virginia. And there I saw, almost front stage, for the first time in my visiting museums, Black Americans who were put either at the same level as the other people in the revolutionary effort, or as strong supporters. And so for this was a surprise to me, and it was. I remember speaking to a few people before I went to the museum, and they were all accolades. You should see this museum; it's great, etc. And I'm using this as a segue to get into the idea of these are examples of how we change narratives, we change stories. We live in the same country, but do we all share the same stories about the past? How can the narratives be updated for more Americans to benefit? So, the aspiration of full empowerment of all Americans on U.S. soil, focusing on the largest and growing community of Latino Latinas. So what I'm asking out loud, and I've been wondering about, is how could the U.S. gain from full participation by this group in co-building a more inclusive future? How can we enlarge the U.S. part of the American pie to fully include the other Americas? How could the country gain from Latinos who are proud of their roots, can speak Spanish, and share their own stories of courage in facing challenges to resonate with the universal values that inspire all of us? And lastly, what would happen if we were too busy sharing a healthy pride to have time for victimhood. So now I'll go into a couple of more questions regarding gains. How could the country gain from co-building instead of self-protecting? Latinos represent 20% of the U.S. population, but 60% of prisoners. This can be said of also maybe this disproportion can also be mentioned about other minorities, but we're speaking about focusing on Latinos here. Latinos represent 2% of elected officials today. Now, there's been improvement. Since 2000, the number of elected Latinos in office has doubled. However, does past and current legislation reflect co-construction or co-separation? Once again, the interiors and exteriors. So, how can we enlarge the U.S. American pie? White Americans comprise 62% and are decreasing with each census in the United States. Current forecasts for beyond 2050 project whites to represent below 50%. Does U.S. American mean white? And does agency today in USA correlate with identifying as white? And the underlying premise behind these questions are that if this is true, and you don't belong to the majority culture, there's a strong pressure to forego your native culture to go to whatever the culture is that's the most powerful, because that's where you're going to get the most agency. Now, one of my suggestions for this is, instead of canceling, can we add? George Washington and Robert E. Lee were fine leaders. And there are many others who were not white men. Can empowering Latinos to share their own stories of facing challenges resonate with universal values that enrich all Americans? So here's where the stories come in. All peoples who are here today are here because they have made wise choices and persevered. This wisdom is perpetuated by stories shared among close family, clan, tribes, and nations. They demonstrate universal values of resilience, courage, faith, power, and love. Why do only the stories of the majority culture get the airtime and school time? Ethnocentrism is a major force throughout first tier. However, as green center of gravity grows, we are ready to share the limelight with other stories. Here are some examples of minority heroines and heroes. So I start with Sojourner Truth. Many of you may have heard of her. Her best-known speech was delivered extemporaneously in 1851 at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention. And with the title, Ain't I a Woman? And she embodied a fact that is not obvious sometimes, and that is that among the blacks are women, among the women there are blacks. Next one is Cesar Chavez, a labor leader and civil rights activist with efforts to protect agricultural workers. And last example, who's still with us, is Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, a Latino born in the Bronx, and is known for her concern for criminal justice and dissents on issues of race and ethnic identity. So with this, I go back to my original question: how can we reconcile polarities in USA for Latinos and majority culture? And a proud speaking Spanish Latino and a proud American, is it possible? Thank you for listening. Gracias. What are your thoughts? Any improvement suggestions? How can I find more people, organizations to move this forward? All of this is welcome. So since we don't have breakout rooms, and perhaps just with a small committee, if you'd like, one suggestion could be give you a couple minutes to get your thoughts, and we could do like a round table.
And while people get their thoughts, Andres, can you stop screen sharing? We want to see you.
Okay.
Right. Andres, well, you are on. So would you like to have everyone give a brief response, their first response? Do you care if we respond to, I heard 3 different prompts. I heard how to move this forward in content. I heard how to find people and places to help move it on, and people who are on this in this group who are interested in some way to move it on. So I heard those asks. Is there more specific than that?
Oh no, that's great. Yeah. Those 3, if you can, if the folks here can give me a response to those 3 questions, that would be just a gold mine for me.
Or any of it. And I do want to say, Andres, I'm so impressed because this is so important to you and it's so huge. And you have narrowed it down and narrowed it down. And I think part of what I would see as something that would be helpful also from the group is what are the topics or the categories, the pieces and parts that the group would see you could hone down on in. And I'm also going to say, Andres, if this is wrong, let me know. I think one of the things you were thinking about is how to give like a 12-hour workshop to a junior college kind of audience. And so what would be a topic for that? Is that also part of how you're working? Okay, yeah. Now I'm going to be quiet, but I wanted to try to frame it. Andres has been working on this so hard. Karen, thank you for all your help. But I know his mind is like so big out there that I wanted to make sure that if there's questions, go ahead. I'm quiet. Andres, you're on.
Thank you, Kim. Barbara. Hi. We can't hear you.
May I tell you a story?
Please.
I spent 40 years in Houston. I'm no longer there. And you may or may not know that the city is a third white, Hispanic, and Black, and with a chunk of Asian that is growing. Mm-hmm. And 25 years ago, maybe, I'd have to think about the time. When I was a young women professional, one of the strongest Hispanic women I have ever met, Gracie Saints. And if you haven't heard of her, you need to check her out. Since I left Houston, I've lost contact with her. But a lawyer herself, and a bridge builder is, I think, the word I'd like to take. And at the time, Texas was very much into racial gerrymandering.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were city council seats that were reserved for Blacks. And there were city council seats that were reserved for Hispanics. And the districts were gerrymandered a bit, so it sort of worked. But if you happen to be a white person living in a Black district, nobody thought you counted. If you happen to be a Black person living in a white district, well, I'm sorry, you just don't get represented. I mean, that was literally some of the attitude. And the godfather in the Hispanic community was a fellow by the name of Ben Reyes. And Houston also had seats at large, which normally went to the rich whites. Let's be honest. You know, Houston was that kind of city 30 years ago. And Gracie said, well, you know, when I talk to all you other professional women in town, I don't notice that you think those are white seats. And I also hear us talking all the time that we don't think they're white seats. So what would you guys think if I ran for one of those seats at large that was not? And of course, every woman who knew her went, "Go for it, Gracie." And we immediately got behind her. We helped her with her campaign. And the kingmaker, the godfather, came out against her saying that, well, that just wasn't the way things worked. She had to, and I think being a woman probably in his Hispanic culture had maybe a bit to do with his attitude as well, but she couldn't run. He wouldn't support her. And you want to see angry professional women. And the black and white professional women, more so, I think, than the Hispanic, who sort of understood their culture. But I mean, we were angry. And so we went out and we told our husbands, we told our bosses, we told our coworkers that we expected votes for Gracie. And she won. She won. And we considered that a major victory for unity. And so I think she's someone, I've like I said, I've lost track with her since I've left Houston, and I don't know if she's even still living. She's a little older than I am, if I remember.
Gracie
Saint, that's SAENTZ, I believe.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she was a Hispanic councilwoman at large in the city of Houston 20, 30 years ago. It's been a while, but it's one of my favorite stories because it's a triumph over inclusion and unity rather than exclusion.
Yes, yes, yes.
Jane,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. It's got, it starts the wheels turning to think about some of the things you said. One of them in particular was, what would it be like, I'm paraphrasing, to share our pride as a nation rather than by the color of our skin. But we have this commonality, and I'm Canadian. I now have US and Canadian citizenship, but to share what binds us rather than what divides us. I think that's such a big part of this, is to find the commonality, find what connects us, because it's greater than what divides us, and to be helping people learn to find those things, and to we just heard about these women rising up and saying, okay, this is not right. We're going to come together and make this happen. And you're seeing this in the country right now, people stepping up and saying, women's rights matter. And so it's creating something that connects us, that goes beyond, ethnic lines or whatever. So that, to me, is a big part of it, is to find what connects us. What is our shared pride that we can all celebrate together? There's a great book called, just the title alone is what called me to it. It's called Hospicing Modernity.
Yes, yes.
Do you know this book? Yes.
Yeah, I've read it. Yeah.
Yes. And I think her work, she, just for the sake of anybody who hasn't read it, she is her from South American family. Her mother indigenous, her father German, and she grew up in this kind of like world of, which one am I? And each family hated the other side, and this kind of thing. But found how those two things how can I be a proud person of both ethnicities without being the other or hating one or the other. And she now she's a university professor at UBC in Canada, teaching this to the students. And I don't know if you remember this in the book. I thought it was so great. She went to some kind of gathering, and she ended up having to sit at lunchtime with a bunch of the younger students. There were no room left for her wherever else. And they started asking her, what do you teach? She started trying to explain what it was. And they said, oh, you're just trying to learn people how to be an anti. And she was expecting racist. And they said, you're anti asshole. And she said, yeah, that's what I teach. And she kind of adopted that with a little bit of pride. Yeah, anti asshole. Um, so that book just opened up my my inspiration of possibility, right? And that's where I've gotten. If we're looking at the four quadrants, it's like, what internal, how can I do this in an internal way individually, but also in our culture and also in our, our social systems, this idea of what connects us rather than divides us. I think it's really paramount for our culture if we're wanting to evolve beyond the polarity in many ways that is happening right now. And the last thing I'll say is this also brings up the idea of trauma healing. Are you familiar with Thomas Hubel's work where he's doing racial trauma? And so it goes beyond just the individual, where this stuff gets passed down first, millennia through our descendants and through our ancestors. And for us to be doing that work on a big scale, I think is also really important. Wonderful questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. So just to bounce off what you said regarding trauma, because I did mention the word victimhood. I'm aware that the trauma work needs to be done, but I also know that there are plenty of competent people that are doing that work, and so I'm looking at the other side of it. But absolutely, those are two. You can't get out of victimhood unless you also address the trauma. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Karen.
Yes, hi. Glad to be here with you. I find the part of me, I'm usually a very abstract, head in the clouds kind of gal. But as I was working with you on this project, I kept wanting to focus in on what is this project? Well, what is this project? And I've heard it articulate itself as maybe like you mentioned, the possibility of a 12-hour workshop, or is it a college course, or is it a series of cultural centers that hold events for the community? What is this project will turn into? And so I felt, as I've been listening to all of us here, to ask you the question I asked in one of our meetings with Kim is 5 years from now, you wake up one morning 5 years from today, and it's a good day, and you are delighted to get up out of bed because you're going to go do this. What does that day feel like to you? What is this that you're going to get out there and you are so excited that it's happening?
This is I'm invited to one of these places. Centers. It could be a junior college. Now, just a little note on the junior college. When I was doing my groundwork for this, I realized that the population with the greatest potential to take this message is between the ages of 18 and 30. Why? Because the rest of the people, before you're 18, your identity is still very much tied into what your parents say. And then after 30, you're too busy with a job, raising a family, etc., to really pay much attention. And so I found, this is why you mentioned, so I'm interested in with people from 18 to 30.
Okay.
That's the population I want to work with. And what my day would look like is that I'm invited to go to it could be a college somewhere where they're having events on celebrating the Latino heroines, and celebrating collaboration between professionals who are doing similar work in Latin America. Because what I've discovered is that the stories are so important. And what I found when I was talking to many of these young Latinos is most of them did not know about all of these wonderful Latinos that have been doing this work. Because they're educated in the United States, and all they know are the white heroes. And if they know about Latinos, often it's the people who aren't very inspirational, like the criminals and gangsters, and so that would be my ideal. I'd be going to one of those places and knowing that this is being done in other places where they're having these events, where they're celebrating connection with Latinos who are moving things forward, either here in the United States, or with other places in Latin America.
Mm-hmm. So heroes and heroines like Sojourner Truth is to the Black community to collect these stories and share them.
Absolutely, because when you talk to people, they all have stories. It's a question of putting them into the limelight. Here I'm going to make a little. I don't know if it's a digression, but I remember. So I've been talking to lots of people who've been doing this kind of work, but with other populations. So there's two people. I spoke to Greg Thomas. I don't know if you're familiar with him. So he's been doing this through jazz for the African Americans. More empowerment and more just bringing them out in the light, and so they can see, hey, this is about connection with music, etc. Because music unites people. Music is absolutely colorless. There is no when musicians get together, they don't really care, and this has gone on for millennia. And so there was somebody else though. There's an Indian fellow who is very interested. He's Rajiv Malhotra. He's done a lot of work in trying to decolonize, the current Indian population in India, but at the same time, he's working with the Indians in the UK. He was invited to speak at the Parliament in the UK, and they asked him a question. So, did you expect us to give you reparations for because we ransacked India for a couple of centuries? He said, no, I don't. I'm not advocating for reparations. What I want is a monument in the middle of Trafalgar Square attesting to all of the Indians that died for in the World War II for the Western model. Because if it weren't for a lot of the people who came from outside of the UK, we'd all be speaking German. And what surprised the people in the audience was that, yes, this is about the stories, so that you can no longer get away with othering because they're not part of us. So just wanted to give that example out there.
Great. So collecting and sharing the stories.
That's right. So they become part of our common core, the same way that today everybody speaks, when they speak about the fathers of the United States, they speak about Abraham Lincoln, George Washington. And I'm hearing more and more Martin Luther King. Okay, but there are other people, other people who are not white and not men, or not. And so we need to bring this into the fore, so that when you ask a junior high school or in the United States, so who are the heroes of this country? They can name other people besides the usual
suspects. Yeah. So collecting and sharing stories.
Yes,
that's the heart. That's the heart and the core of this.
Because so collecting, sharing stories, that belongs to the collective interior. Okay, and I don't know if you've heard the famous business guru. He died a few years ago. Drucker.
Peter Drucker. Yes.
Yes. And he had one of his quotes was, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Strategy is about exteriors. We're planning all this exterior. We're doing this, this, this. Culture will eat that up. If you don't deal with the inside, forget you can make all the plans, all of the laws, all the rules. If you haven't dealt with the inside, it's not going to happen. So with this project, I'm dealing with the inside, the cultural interiors.
So, Andres, one of the things that you mentioned to me one time was also finding ways of actually working with those 18 to 30-year-olds to be able to have them express their own stories.
Absolutely.
So their own pride, their own familial heroes, their own cultural heroes, their own songs that were meaningful to them, poems that were meaning. So I'm just reminding you and answering Karen's question too, that I heard him say, having activities where Latino, but we also talked about all the others in America, so that Proud America is, in Jane's words, an overarching, but having a real sense of identity and agency in each part, in each whole on, to make a larger whole.
Yes.
Here's where the theory of hold-ons really, it's so profound, but it really works here, that we get to be proud whatever, a proud Croatian and a proud American, that everybody gets to be that the Croatian or the Argentinian or the whatever is itself, but it's also in the context of the larger community. Yeah. We have such a foundation for this. We are very far from being perfect. But as I was listening to you, Andres, I thought of something I think the Olympics back about 10 years ago when it was in China. So it must have been 2014, shortly afterwards, Putin invaded Crimea. Anyway, what's his name? I'm spacing out. A really famous New York Times columnist was in China covering the Olympics. And one of the stories he told in one of his editorials that stuck with me was as the journalists were escorted around the various camps for the various countries. And when they went to the Nigerian camp, almost everybody looked very clearly Nigerian, and the ones from China looked Chinese, and the ones from Mexico looked Mexican. There's a little more variety there, but every other camp they went to for the Olympic athletes, they looked like they were one ethnicity more or less. But then in the U.S. camp, they looked like every other nation in the world had sent a few from there, and the United States already was. So and our ideals, I'm going to back up a bit. See, here now I'm getting theoretical and in my head, but the definition of my nation, who I am, is an ethnicity. For most of the nations of the world, the whole sovereign nation state was created very recently, but mostly around ethnicity. But in the United States, we are exceptional in that we were founded around a series of ideals. And this is something that the pre-modern mindset finds very difficult, which is one of the reasons we are so polarized in this nation, because the default setting for people who are in a pre-modern mindset is your sense of your community is an ethnicity. And this is part of the deep structure. Well, modernity transcends that theoretically, but then we get to green and we kind of swing to the other extreme from the pre-modern. But then now that we are putatively beginning to be second tier, we see how this can all be contained in a larger context where everybody gets to be their own ethnicity. And at the same time, we can embrace these common ideals. So, the United States is based on a series of ideals that we're still very much growing into, but we have here the foundation for this. And what you are proposing, so what I'm hearing you talking about, Andres, is helping move this forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But we've got a great foundation for it.
And if we'd only just start listening to each other. Barbara.
It occurs to me also that you might have people research their family stories. You sometimes discover things, particularly in your early college and stuff, things that you never knew about your ancestors. I know when I was in college, my grandmother was dying of cancer at the university hospital. And I got to know her much better because I literally visited her 2 or 3 times a day. And I discovered that I knew my great grandparents were immigrants. I knew they had a homestead. But what I didn't know is they were almost starving, and she left school before 8th grade to go to work to feed the family because her 10 cents a week literally meant the other kids didn't die, right?
Wow.
And now there's heroism, right?
That's right.
I have a Chinese friend whose mother literally walked across China with him and his sister on her back in front of Mao's army. Hearing them tell that story, thinking that their father was dead, and discovering that he had made it out. He was an Air Force pilot, and he had made it out literally on the last plane out of China, and found her there with the kids. You know, stories like that of just personal family heroism. And yeah, it's traumatic. I mean, you know, you think about how it felt to be almost starving. You think about how it felt to be running with your children in front of an enemy army.
Yeah.
And yet they persevered. There's some generational trauma. I mean, I saw it in my grandmother sometimes, but there's also, my gosh, the heroism, right? And so suggest that they ask for their grandparents and their great grandparents' stories. How did they, you know, what did they have to do, for example, to come to the United States? How hard was it? Things like that. And I think people will be amazed at the personal heroism of folks. And feeling that way, it changes how you feel about your family's position, right? I mean, my parents were poor. You know my grandmother's story, right? And so I often felt I was from the wrong side of the tracks. But when I really understood how far my grandmother had come, it's like, wow, maybe I'm not at all so ran after all. And it really drove me to go on to college and to do all those things, because she had that can-do attitude of, didn't matter how hard it is, you may not even win. So if those kinds of stories that they can get from and then share them with their friends. Our Girl Scout troop, when my daughter was not little, middle school, I guess, we brought grandparents in to tell the stories of what it was like in the segregated South. And I mean, some of our girls couldn't even believe it. You know, what do you mean you weren't allowed to go to the same school? What do you mean you couldn't go to the same bathroom? You know, I mean, yes, they'd sort of seen it in history classes, but to have two older women tell them what it had felt like to live in those days, it was incredibly meaningful.
Yes. Those are the youth.
And they don't have to be well-known heroes, right?
No. Yes. Thank you. Tom.
You know, I'm always amazed how well the Jews have done. Talk about a persecuted culture. And I suspect it had a lot to do with the strong families and systems of faith, but it's doable, is my belief. Kind of like what Karen said, the ideal is the meritocracy of this culture. But I was thinking, Andres, that the age frame you're going after, I think, is apropos, because the young kids, I would want to prepare them, that get them to become aware of the fear people have around different cultures. It's probably tribal, that how many generations they went to war because the red or some level of tribal. And that's what we're overcoming. It's not that you're not worthy. They're just afraid of different. And we still see it to this day. I mean, the idea that America is going to go on the 50% white is firing the GOP. And they're using it. Barbara mentioned perseverance is another thing I would want to equip them for. Is it doesn't mean you stop. You just keep going forward. And if you can do both of those and you have faith in your own ability to contribute, then you're eventually going to succeed. So whether it's cultural, for me, it was economic, is getting away. My father had a roadside fruit stand, editorial by Wednesday on Mars Bridge show. I'm doing my whole family history in pictures, 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. And it was the doubt, do I belong here? Every step I took was a challenge of overcoming the doubt. And I'll never forget at Boys Catholic High School. I got in at a solid level. I almost flunked out because I didn't have the parents to show me academics. And, these kids were from the other side of the track. But that's where the perseverance comes in, where I don't care how much I get beat up. In the end, I'm going to be here. So I agree with Barbara. Knowing your personal story is as important as knowing the cultural story. My personal story was my parents my grandfather and uncle peddled fruit in the streets in a wagon and a horse. And for whatever reason, I was picked to do the academic track. I almost didn't have a choice. But it seemed like a noble path. So knowing where you come from puts meaning and perseverance behind it. So I do think it's the story of America. So many people have done this. That I do agree with Karen on that. Good work.
Thank you. Tiffany, get your hand up. Good to see you.
Hi, thank you. I was having some computer issues, so I'm calling in from the phone, but I'm being seen from the computer. Okay. So thank you for the presentation. It was very vulnerable in a lot of ways, and it really cuts to the heart of the dilemma and the issues that you're trying to address. So I really appreciated that. And as somebody who grew up in Arizona, where I saw the inequities of education really playing out based on language barriers and using young people and families as political scapegoats for underpaying workers, for not funding public education and opportunities for kids coming in, immigrating into the United States. And I think my own family history of being new to the United States and ultimately having that immigration awareness of what it's like to be first generation, to be toggling cultures, and ultimately to be assimilating into the idea of what America became after World War II in this very America on top. I'd say even like the Cold War really pushed towards this ideal of Americanism that was white. And that was after years of assimilation of Italians, of Germans, of, the white European immigrants to the US. So I think that there is trauma involved in that. and then there was a superiority of being of English speaking, being an American worker, serving in American military, like all, and who got the benefits was often not Black soldiers, not Latino soldiers, you know. So there's a very rich, complex history as to how whiteness is constructed and how all other peoples are valued within those structures that are serving elites. You know, it doesn't serve poor white people to be against other workers or other people outside of that gymnastics, that they're somehow better than other people who are also being exploited, being pushed out of their own, you know, countries, lands. So there's a lot there. And in trying to honor that, I think the work of Dolores Huerta into her 90s continues to be very inspirational, because she's on the ground talking to people, young people, old people, you know. She does so much groundwork, and her foundation around uplifting those stories and the rights of Latino people in California, Texas, across the country. So she's a really great advocate. And because in California, we actually have multicultural expectations in the colleges, that might be a good place to tap into. And New Mexico is also doing a lot in regards to free college and really supporting their local community to get more debt-free educations. So wanted to uplift that. And lastly, sorry, let me just check my note. I think it had to do with, not only are we in a major political shift where the dreamers have come of political age and are also becoming parents. So you've got second generation young people who are flipping the political script in Arizona and other, parts of the country. So that's a major force, because so many of their parents and grandparents were disenfranchised. They didn't have a political voice or a right to vote. And when you know how much people are still paying taxes, not getting the same access to health care, like how much has been paid for by their families, uplifting their political voices, and also honoring the rise in multicultural and being a multi-ethnic person. I think that's part of the, moving away from the white population, is you actually have a lot more mixed race people, and tapping into that relationship and upholding the value of that multiculturalism is part of the work I hope that we can do to build community and influence education and politics around this issue. So thank you again for sharing everything.
Thank you, Tiffany. I just want to say, so one thing that you pointed out, which was highlighted a little bit by Jane, but in the book Hospicing Modernity, if you notice the word hospicing, obviously this means modernity is on its way out. And what's interesting is that there are a lot of, and this can be said of all minorities, but I'm focusing on the Latino minorities, is that economics will trump national or ethnic pride. What that means is, if I'm going to have a better lifestyle by foregoing my belonging, usually I'll go for the better lifestyle and just put the other one on the back burner. However, as we're getting a critical mass of Latinos, is now becoming, people are starting to think, wait a minute, but why do I have to still continue putting my ethnicity on a back burner? But there are a lot of successful Latinos who are wealthy, and they're wealthy from the modern standpoint, meaning they're wealthy because they've intelligently found a way to exploit, and when I'm using the word exploit, I'm not necessarily meaning take advantage of, but exploit the modern model, meaning here's an opportunity, I'm going to take as much as I can, and it's legal, but that's now being called into question. That whole modern model of just take what you can get, and you don't have to share with anybody else. And that's a whole other discussion, but I'm sure that as we move towards this more inclusivity, we've also got to think about the economics of it. So, but thank you, Tiffany.
We're at about 3 minutes till the top of the hour. Brandon, did you want to join? Did anybody else have some words that they wanted to say to Andres? If we go over a couple of minutes, that's okay. But I wanted to remind you.
I was trying to think of something intelligent to say, and I'll say the best that I have come up with so far, which is this brainstorm that I've been doing here to think about the ways to inspire, young adults to get involved, and that, through something like integral, although it could be kind of gently kind of offered to them, but then there's like kind of through lines, or there's like pathways, and within, I guess, what is the closest thing to integral that is common among or popular among young adults, or within like the Latino community? And I'm thinking now, of course, I don't want to be stereotypical here, but just to think about that, because you don't know who you're dealing with. So you kind of have to, sometimes these kind of stereotypes, when used lightly, can be useful. So there is definitely a culture or a tradition within Latino communities of being inspired by literature, like the magical realism, so there's a lot of these literary traditions that then could be used to help inspire people to improve their lives and their communication skills, and also to appreciate science and journalism a little better, those are areas that I'm really interested in, is the helping people appreciate science and better sense making and better community engagement, across the board. I'm not in particular focused on any age groups or ethnic groups with my work, but what I've been trying to look at, some of it could be used within your context as well of your project. So now I have to figure, though, a lot of these, people in the age group that you're talking about, that maybe they don't read much these days, and maybe there's other like shows, though, that they might be interested in, that, whatever, shows that are, and gosh, maybe they don't even watch shows, these kids these days, maybe they're just on TikTok, but there might be ways to use that to then, like, okay, use it to say, okay, what is this, what's going on with this character in this situation, and and apply it to their life, and having like magical realist or sci-fi elements helps it be interesting. But then you could, even superhero movies could do this, and you can like actually start to think about what's going on in your life, and you can start to think about, like, get interested in natural and nature and ecology and science as well, so then that's a way to expand the horizons and use those sort of things that some people of that age group are already interested in to begin with. That's just, and like I said, I was thinking about something intelligent to say, but that was the best I came up with.
Thank you, Brandon. What I particularly appreciate there is alternative ways that are, for instance, I'm from the last century, so stories and books. But you're right. Most young people they don't walk around with books in their hands, and how can you? So if we can get TikTok videos that send a message across, why not?
TikTok videos of superheroes, of our ethnic superheroes appear to every stage. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everyone. Thank you very much. And I also want to encourage Andres, really and truly, if you move this forward and then taking our ideas and then find some specific place that you've moved it and you want to join us again, Andres is doing it. Integral leadership in action. He's doing it. And I would want us to help with that. And you give us opportunity to look at this issue of multiculturalism, which really I don't think has been put forth so much in our integral lens. So I thank you. Are there any closing thoughts? I know that we're over time, so I want to make sure that everybody knows you can zip out. But if you have a closing thought, Andres, if you want to close, let's do it and see everybody next month.
So I just want to say thank you, all of you, because I'm finally I'm able now to say, okay, this is starting to take off, and I have a little bit of a message that I can use, a little nugget here that I can use so what are you doing? Well, this is what I'm doing. And the reason I started doing this is I don't know for how long I've heard I've heard many more people speak about we need to bring us together. We're tired of the old stories. But how do we do it? And so this is inspiration. So thank you, all of you.